What if the greatest maritime disaster in history never happened? What if the Titanic, that magnificent vessel of human ambition, had safely reached New York Harbor on April 17th, 1912? Today we're diving into the alternate timeline where 1,500 people didn't perish in the icy Atlantic waters, and a transportation empire worth billions in today's money wasn't erased from history. The Titanic wasn't just a ship, it was the crown jewel of the White Star Line, owned by American financier J.P. Morgan through his International Mercantile Marine Company. This wasn't some small-time operation. Morgan had invested the equivalent of $3.7 billion in today's dollars to create this shipping conglomerate. But here's where history takes its cruel turn. Just 1 year before the Titanic's maiden voyage, J.P. Morgan canceled his reservation on the ship due to illness, a decision that saved his life but couldn't save his maritime empire. Had the Titanic completed its journey successfully, White Star Line would have cemented its reputation as the premier luxury transatlantic carrier. Their business model was genius. While Cunard Line focused on speed with ships like the Lusitania, White Star competed with unparalleled luxury. The Titanic wasn't just transportation, it was a floating palace designed to attract the world's wealthiest passengers. Think about this. If the Titanic had survived, the White Star Line would have continued operating its planned trio of Olympic-class vessels: Olympic, Titanic, and Britannic. These engineering marvels would have dominated Atlantic crossings for decades. Instead, the disaster created a financial nightmare. Insurance covered only $12 million of the $15 million loss. White Star Line never fully recovered. The Britannic, intended as Titanic's sister ship, was converted to a hospital ship during World War I and sank in 1916 after hitting a mine. But the ripple effects go far beyond one company's balance sheet. Some of the world's most influential businessmen died that night. Benjamin Guggenheim, Isidor Straus, co-owner of Macy's, and John Jacob Astor IV, one of America's wealthiest men with a fortune equivalent to $4.5 billion today. What businesses might these titans have built had they lived? What innovations might they have funded? Astor, for instance, had recently invested in inventions like the turbine engine and the airplane. How might these technologies have developed differently with his continued patronage? And here's a twist you probably never considered. Had the Titanic reached New York, maritime safety regulations might have remained dangerously inadequate for years longer. The disaster led directly to the first International Convention for Safety of Life at Sea in 1914, which mandated sufficient lifeboats for all passengers and crew, 24-hour radio communications, and regular lifeboat drills. Without the tragedy, these life-saving regulations might have been delayed until another inevitable disaster occurred. Sometimes progress comes at a terrible price. There's also the cultural impact to consider. No sinking means no 1997 James Cameron blockbuster, no Celine Dion My Heart Will Go On, no Leonardo DiCaprio King of the World moment. The Titanic disaster has inspired over 500 books, countless documentaries, and exhibitions that have been viewed by more than 25 million people worldwide. This cultural phenomenon has generated billions in revenue. In our alternate timeline, the White Star Line might have continued to thrive, possibly evolving into a luxury cruise empire that could rival today's Carnival Corporation, which generates over $20 billion in annual revenue. Instead, White Star struggled through the Great Depression and eventually merged with Cunard Line in 1934, effectively ending its independent existence. J.P. Morgan's shipping dream didn't die completely, though. The International Mercantile Marine Company eventually evolved into the United States Lines, which operated until 1986. A shadow of what might have been. Perhaps most fascinating is how the Titanic's sinking accelerated the decline of the great ocean liners. While air travel would eventually have replaced ships as the primary means of crossing the Atlantic, the disaster damaged public confidence in maritime travel. Had the Titanic completed its journey successfully, the golden age of ocean liners might have lasted decades longer. What makes this alternate history so haunting is how close it came to happening. If the lookouts had spotted the iceberg just 30 seconds earlier, if the ship had been traveling slightly slower, if the wireless operators had relayed ice warnings more effectively, history would have been completely rewritten. So the next time you watch that famous movie or hear that Celine Dion song, remember, you're witnessing the cultural echo of a business empire that almost was A transportation revolution that sank to the ocean floor along with 1,500 souls on that cold April night.